All right, we're starting on our second act, the second act in Revelation chapter 12. Now, I'll just run through the handouts, excuse me, to make sure that you've got them. We've got a set of notes. The presentation won't exactly follow this, but it'll have the material in it. Now, secondly, you've got a worksheet, Revelation chapter 12, Act 2, 7 to 12. No, this one here is this is scripture. Oh, okay. So that's the one you'll be using for marking. You've got one? There it goes. Okay. In front of you. This one. That's for marking if you need to mark on it, okay? And then we've got two other sheets called mirror imaging, Revelation chapter 12, mirror imaging. You got that? You'll need that one first. No, that's the other one. This one.
Okay, you need that one first.
And then we'll be looking at this one, which is mirror imaging in the trumpet section in Revelation. Because what I want to show you this afternoon is first, I'm sure you do. You sure you don't have it? No. You've got it now. Okay. So what I want to demonstrate first is the importance of the section that we're getting into study. Because we just go through Revelation section by section by section, but sometimes we fail to really see the significance of the passage itself. And so I want to start off this afternoon by just looking at the structure of Revelation chapter 12. This is revision because we should know this very well now. So Revelation consists of 3 acts. Act 1 is the first 6 verses. That's where you've got the 2 signs in heaven, the woman and the dragon and the woman interacting, and then the woman fleeing into the wilderness for 1260 days, or 3.5 times. We're okay on that, huh? Now that story is picked up again in Act 3. In Act 3, verses 13 to 17, we get the dragon now chasing the woman who flees into the wilderness, and then the next sequence of activities takes place. We clear on that? But right between the two, we've got Act number 2, Act 2 of the drama in Revelation chapter 12. Revelation 12, 7 to 12. And I want you to see the significance of what we're going to be studying today, because that's our focus. We may or may not get it all finished, but we'll just see how we'll see how we go. If we don't get it finished, we'll finish it next week and move on to Act number 3, which is fairly short. So we okay? We know where we're going, huh? All right, so the 2 sheets that you've got on mirror imaging are the ones I want you just briefly to look at. And the first one you'll look at is Revelation 12, mirror imaging number 1. Now, I'll put some diagrams up here on the PowerPoint, which will illustrate it. Now, we'll look first at the structure of the parenthesis. That's chapter 12, 7 to 12, okay? Just briefly look at the structure of it, and we'll find it's divided into 2 parts. You can just see this by reading it. We'll have a look at the 2 parts. In verses 7 to 9, we get war in heaven and its outcomes. Now, war arose in heaven, Michael and his angel fighting against the dragon. So you see the whole scene has changed, as we noted before. We've changed from the wilderness and the woman on earth, and now suddenly in verse 7 he's gone to heaven, where he says major conflict between 2 parties. Michael versus the dragon, and on each side there are angels behind those 2 leaders. And it says that the dragon was defeated in verse 8, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great red dragon was thrown down, that old serpent who's called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He's thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. So that's the first block, war in heaven and its outcomes. And then what follows is an announcement which goes from verses 10 right through to verse 12. Now salvation and power and kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, because the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down, and they've conquered him by the blood of the Lamb. And in verse 12, therefore rejoice, O heavens, and the last part, but woe unto you, O earth and sea. So you've got a announcement with associated rejoicing and the announcement of woes, huh? And so there's two parts. And so we just keep that in mind as we move into it. So there it is in a diagram form. Revelation 12, 7 to 12, 2 parts. We okay on that? All right. War in heaven with its outcomes in the first 3 verses, 7, 8 and 9. And then in 10, 11 and 12, the last 3, we get the announcement with the song of rejoicing and the announcement of the woes. Now, I want to look at the position of this into Revelation chapter 12, and this is where you'll need those sheets. In chapter 12, verse 1, we've got a woman with her child. Okay, she's expecting a child. But then we come into verse 3 to 5, and we see the dragon, and what was he seeking to do? He's seeking to destroy the woman, yeah? And then the next step in the story was the woman flees to the wilderness for 1260 days. And then if we go into the next part of the story, this is what you'll see in verses 7 to 9 of chapter 12, the serpent's cast to the earth. We okay on this? But then we come to the heart of what we're going to be dealing with today, which is verses 10 to 12. This is the announcement section on Revelation chapter 12. And when we move beyond that into verses 13, we find we've got another reference to the serpent being cast to earth. So he's taken 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. He's arrived at this point, and now it looks like he's starting to reverse. You following? So we're starting to get what we call a chiasm, or we're going to get mirror imaging. So look at the next part. In verse 14, what does the woman do? She flees to the wilderness. You see, he's stepping backwards from that central point. Are we okay on this? Are any of you not too clear on this? Because if you're not, I've been thinking I should take a session and deal with things like chiasms so that you're clear on it, because I'm using them all the time. Plus the Hebrew parallel way of thinking. So would you like material on that, or? Because if you do, we'll have a session soon. We'll have a session on it, so we're clear on what we're discussing here. And then after this, the dragon seeks to destroy the woman who escapes. But before this, he sought to destroy the child who escapes. Can you see how the way it's, the whole chapter's building up? And then we come to the last one, where we've got the woman and the rest of her offspring, which matches this. This is the Hebrew way of thinking. They take step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, makes the point, and then they reverse back from it. So they emphasize the key point is this one here, chapter 12, 10 to 12. So the whole of chapter 12 is building up to this point and working its way back from it. So this is like the head of the arrow, the point of the arrow. This is where the focus of chapter 12 lies. So it's fairly important, huh? But then I want to take you into the next sheet, which is the mirror imaging in the trumpet section of Revelation. And we'll build off this. Now in chapter 12, we've seen the mirror imaging. But you have a look. In the first part of chapter 12, what do we got? A great red dragon with 7 heads and? But in chapter 13, when we get into chapter 13, we're going to find a sea beast with what?
7 heads.
And 10 horns, mirror imaging. And then, when we move back from this, in chapter 11, verse 1, we've got the outer courtyard of the temple being trampled for how long? And then when we move in the other direction past this, we get the sea beast makes war on the saints for?
42 months.
Can you see it paralleling? Yeah? And then the last one is in chapter 8:13, right at the beginning of the trumpet section, we get an eagle flying in the midst of heaven, and he's announcing 3 woes. You'll see that in 8:13. But then when we come past chapter 13 into chapter 14, what have we got flying in the midst of heaven? 3 angels. And what have they got? 3 woes, 3 messages. Midst of heaven, an eagle, 3 angels. And so the whole of Revelation, the trumpet section in Revelation, is a mirror image. And right at the heart of the whole of the trumpet section is the chiasm in Revelation chapter 12. Those key verses, verse 10 to 12, lie right at the very, very heart of the trumpet section of Revelation. So they must be pretty important, huh? Because the whole of the trumpet section is working up towards this section, Revelation chapter 12, and it is moving away from it. So the whole of the trumpet section is pointing to these verses. And have a quick look at it. We'll just highlight it, but we won't go into detail. And it says in these verses, they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives even unto death. See, Revelation opens with a promise to the overcomers in the 7 letters. To him who overcomes, 7 times it says in the letters, to him who overcomes I will. And then when we come to Revelation chapter 21, we'll find the promises given to those who overcome, and then it goes into the new heavens and the new earth. This is their inheritance. And so right at the center here of the trumpet section is the key to overcoming, which is what the whole book of Revelation is about. Isn't that fantastic? And so we'll be building up towards this today. Now, any quick questions you want to ask before we move on? Okay, now look, I've given you this sheet, this long sheet. What I want you to do for homework is take the 2 sheets with the mirror imaging, get a number of different colours, and just mark the passages, work your way through. Is that okay? It'll reinforce it. So you can see, oh yeah, okay, this is it. And right at the heart, block in those key verses which are the focus of it. Folk, you may recall that the trumpet section of Revelation is dealing with the tribulation time. You remember this? It's connected to the 5th seal, which is connected to Matthew 24, 9 to 28, the day of tribulation. And Matthew 24 is being expanded in the trumpet section. So in the trumpet section, we expect God's people to be going through a lot of suffering, hard times. And the point about overcoming in the trumpet section is really a point that needs to be highlighted. Overcoming what? Overcoming all the tribulations and the trials that the dragon throws against God's church and against God's people. And this is the key. This is the key to surviving. It's to be found in these verses. Okay, you can see now how those first 12 classes are laying a foundation, and now we're starting to draw on them and apply it to our understanding of the passages themselves. We clear on that? That's basically what we're doing. All right, so that's our introduction to chapter 12, 7 down to 12. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to, I'm sorry, that's sneaked in somehow. We don't need it here. Oh yeah, here it is. The whole of the trumpet section is a chiasm, finding its focus in those verses. Now Revelation 12, 7 to 8. You might want to use this sheet that you've got for marking. If you want to do some scribbling, use that sheet there. Revelation 12, 7 to 8. Chapter 12, verse 7. war arose in heaven. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back. And next verse, verse 8, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And so there's basically the introduction to the passage that we're looking at this afternoon. War in heaven, Michael and his angel fighting against the dragon and his angel, and we find the dragon defeated, and there is no longer any place for them in heaven. Now the next verse, verse 9, we're all clear on this. This is straightforward, huh? We don't need to go into a lot of explanation. But we move on to verse 9, and we find verse 9's got 2 to 3 aspects in it, and these are expanding verse 8. The first thing is this: the dragon was what? He's thrown down, that ancient serpent called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He's thrown down, but where's he thrown down to? Right, he's thrown down to the earth. So this is the continuation of the story in verse 8. No longer any place found for him in heaven, verse 8. Clear on that? So, okay, so if he didn't have a place in heaven, where is his place? And we find it here in verse 9. He's thrown down, and he's thrown down to the earth. We'll look at the timing of this towards the end of our session this afternoon, or we will look at it next week, depending how far we get. And then it goes on and says, his angels were thrown down with him. You remember in the first 6 verses, the tail of the dragon drew down 1/3 of the stars of heaven. And stars in Revelation chapter 1 verse 20 are angels or messengers. The stars of the 7 churches are the messengers or the angels of the 7 churches. And so this is interpreting that part of verse 3. Okay, and so thrown down to the earth. So here's the connection. No longer any place in heaven in verse 8, and verse 9 clarifies it. He's thrown down to the earth, and his angels are thrown down with him. We okay on that? Revelation not difficult if we just go easy and follow the thinking that's recorded, the words that are recorded that reveal the flow of thought, huh? Okay, so that's the first aspect. The dragon and his angels are thrown down, and are thrown down to the earth. All right. Now, Revelation chapter 12, verse 12. Have a look at that next verse. We've got 3 lines coming out of this verse, just so we follow. We've got chapter 12, 8 and 9. The dragon, no place in heaven, thrown down to the earth. And so that's one line, the fact that he's thrown down. Now there's a second line that comes out of this too. And I just want to go to a couple of other verses. Have a look at verse 12. Verse 12, the second part of verse 12. And notice what it says. Woe to you. Who? O earth and sea. For the devil has what? Has come down to you in great wrath. And so this is telling us, the second line now is starting to tell us the fact that the dragon's come down, he's thrown down to the earth, but he's come down with great wrath. Incidentally, this is off to the side, and I probably shouldn't do it, but you notice it says, O earth and sea. When you go into chapter 13, where does the first beast come from? He comes from the sea. And where does the second beast come from? It comes from the land. And so there's mirror imaging there too, you see. You get this all the time occurring. This is the way Hebrews were trained to think from the time they were small. They were thinking in this term. Okay, he's coming down and he's got great wrath. Why? Because he knows his time's short. And so that's really a key point that's growing out of verses 8 and 9. The dragon's defeated, cast down to the earth. He's lost the battle. No longer any place for him in heaven. So he knows his time is short. And the consequence of knowing his time short is what? He's full of great wrath. Full of great wrath. He's angry because he knows there's no way out. He sees the end in Revelation chapter 20. Remember the lake of fire? Yeah, that's what he sees, and he knows that's his destiny and there's no way out of it. And so now he's just absolutely filled with fury because he's lost the battle. The anger against Christ and against God have increased exponentially. And so now, in great wrath, he's come down amongst us, the earth and the sea. And so when we get into chapter 13, this is what we've got to keep in mind, that what's motivating and driving the dragon with the sea beast and the land beast is this great fury, because he knows that he's just got a short time until his end has come. Yeah, that's right. Somebody said, one of the commentators said that maybe the devil's just gone over the edge. He's become psychologically insane with the fury that's now controlling him, you see. He knows he's going to be destroyed, so what does he want? He wants to destroy everybody else with him as well. So this is motivating him, as we're going to see in the next verse, verse 13. And when the dragon saw he had been what? Thrown down to the earth, what did he do? He pursued the woman. So with great wrath, cast down to the earth, and he pursues the woman. That's the second line of thought, huh? We okay? We can understand now the motivation behind the dragon's final act in Revelation chapter 12 and his acts in chapter 13 and through 15 on to 19. Any questions on this? We're just following through the thoughts. And then there is a third line here. This is another aspect of verse 8 and 9. Oh, this is summarizing. No longer any place for them in heaven. The dragon's cast down to the earth. Knowing his time short, he's full of great wrath, and therefore he pursues the woman who flees from him into the wilderness. So that's summarizing that flow of thought that runs through that passage. I wouldn't be trying to find it in the notes at this stage, because I've modified the notes, the PowerPoint, just to try and make it a bit simpler. Now, there's another aspect of this casting down too. The enemy's identified. These passages identify our enemy. Look at chapter 12, verse 9. The great dragon was thrown down, and then it goes down and it says, he was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. So folks, Scripture's telling us that we're living on a planet, but we're not the only intelligent beings on this planet. That there is another dimension to life on earth, and it's the unseen dimension of the supernatural. And look, you look at television today, and what do you find? Program after program after program, which are all dealing with, get in touch with the supernatural. You know, the Medium in Hollywood is one of them, and there's a whole range of programs where this is coming up constantly and continually all the time. People are being bombarded by the fact that the dead are living, and you can contact them and you can speak to them, and they can communicate and speak to you.
Sounds like my son.
It sounds very dangerous.
He wanted me to go, and I said, nope.
No, well, that's correct. We should stay right away from this. Okay, so that's our enemies. The enemy, Satan and his angels. We're sharing the planet with them, or they're sharing the planet with us. We're cast down together. So we've got an army of unseen enemies under the leadership of the dragon, and they're focusing on the woman, which is the church. A hidden, invisible enemy that's focusing on each one of us and focusing on God's church. And I think that's quite scary when we start to think of it. I just want to show you a couple of passages in Revelation where this comes right to the surface. And the first one, Revelation 16, verses 13 and 14. 16, 13 and 14. And this is what it says. I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon. Who's the dragon? Satan. Out of the mouth of the beast, and we'll see that as the sea beast of Revelation chapter 13. We'll be looking at that in a couple of weeks. And out of the mouth of the false prophet, we'll see that's the image to the beast in Revelation chapter 13. And what did he see? 3 unclean spirits like frogs. For they are what? Spirits of demons, performing signs, who go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty. And so there, the demons are at work, fallen angels. And what are they going to do? Through great signs, performing signs, the unclean spirits, that is those fallen angels, that army of Satan, are going to go abroad to who? The kings of the whole world. And who are the kings of the whole world? This is the political structures of the earth. And what is he going to do? Assemble them. Gather them together. For what? For battle. On the great day. Yes, exactly. On the great day of God the Almighty. They're going to be gathered together and focused on God's church and God's people. This is the outline of Revelation. We don't go into all the specific little details, but we get those broad strokes of what the future holds for us. We don't try and fit this in and say, oh, well, this is happening here, and it's happening here, it's happening here. We get lost that way. When this happens, we will know, because we will see spiritual powers gathering together, the political powers all coming together with one universal worldwide focus, and that is the destruction of God's church and God's people. And the puppet master pulling the strings is the dragon, and he's pulling the strings through the spirits of demons who are working miracles. Are we okay on this? So this is what's inherent in this passage. It's laying the spiritual dimension for life and living today. So this is what we've got to be constantly aware of. The fact that we're not alone. That we're constantly and quietly under attack. The church is under attack all the time by demonic forces that are trying to hold it back. And folks, he's so successful. He splits us over a whole lot of things. Gets us minds off the mission of the church and gets it onto minute points of theology sometimes, which become major mountains in the views of people, where they get so big that we lose sight of what we're here for. And we become divided, and we start fighting amongst ourselves, and we end up where the devil wants us. So this is church under attack. Now notice Revelation chapter 18, 1 to 3, 1 and 2 I think it should be. After this I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his glory. And he cried out with a mighty voice, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great." Remember, where do we see this? No, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. Those words. This is the second angel's message. And this is repeating the second angel's message, and it's filling it full. But we'll deal with that when we get to chapter 18. Are we all right on this? Notice, why is she fallen? Because Babylon the Great, that is the dragon with the beast and the image to the beast, that's who Babylon is, has become a what? Dwelling place of demons. Now, I'm not saying this, Scripture's saying this. A haunt of what? Every unclean spirit. And so there they are, working through spiritual powers on earth This is the dragon working through spiritual powers of the earth, through his demons, through the spiritual powers of the earth, and gathering together the forces of the world to direct their attention against God's church and against God's people. Okay, so that's the third line that's growing out of this. And it's all there in those verses. See, Revelation will plant a seed, like it's planting a seed here in this verse, these verses, and then it begins to grow them as we move on. And so we move through Revelation, it starts to throw more and more light on some of the points that were previously made. We okay on this? So this is what we are to expect, and that's exactly what we've done here when we've looked at these verses in chapter 16 and chapter 16 and chapter 18. This is explaining what the dragon with his angels, when cast down to the earth, are going to be doing. All right. Now I want to deal with, we're still in these same verses, but I want to deal with the enemy's method of attack. See, he's got his angels, and he's got himself, he's got his army on earth, and now it starts to spell out, verse 9 begins to spell out the name, or spell out the method of attack that the dragon uses against God's church and against God's people. Yeah? Okay, so let's have a look at chapter 12, verse 9. He's going to do this through the use of names and comments. The great red dragon was what? Thrown down. That ancient serpent, the ancient serpent, who's called the devil and Satan. All of these terms here, all of these terms are significant. And we're going to look at them. And when we look at them, we'll begin to see certain aspects of the dragon which become the means or the methods by which he attacks. So these are summarizing, really, his methods of attack on God's church. And there it comes a bit out in the open, the deceiver of the whole world. And so here we've got 4 listed, but he's thrown down to the earth and his angels thrown down with him. And so we're going to take these terms, ancient serpent, the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, and we're going to try and unpack these terms. All right. So we've got the 4 terms. We've already done this. I want you to notice the way they are actually arranged. The terms expose the methods of attack. What he does defines what he is. We clear on this? So he is the ancient serpent, the devil and Satan. Those 2 terms are connected. The deceiver of the whole world. And it's actually another mirror image. They're occurring all the time in Revelation. And so let's just move on and we'll start to look at them. The ancient serpent is the first one we look at. And where does that come from? Genesis chapter 3 verse 1. This is in your notes. And notice what it says about him. The dragon or the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord had made. And so now this crafty creature, the dragon's working through the serpent, this crafty creature is going to now confront the woman. Just as he does in Revelation chapter 12. But his purpose in chapter 12 of Revelation, Genesis chapter 3, are a bit different, but we've got the same confrontation. Now the Hebrew word for crafty is arum. That's the Hebrew word. And sometimes it's used positively. Clever. More subtle. So these are not bad uses of the term, huh? But then we move on and we find that sometimes it's got negative connotations to varying degrees. These are translations I've picked out of Genesis chapter 3 verse 1. Using the online parallel Bible. New King James says more cunning. Now we're starting to move from the positives to the negatives, huh? Being subtle is good, but oh man, you're cunning. It's just starting to move into the negative realm of the use of the words. Most cunning, more crafty. Crafty has not got the best connotation. Shrewd is another translation. You know, the shrewd guy is the one who'll trick you out of a bit of money for his own use, you see. So we're starting to get these negatives, and he's the shrewdest. So these are these terms. It's negative, and this is the point that's being made here in Revelation. The way the dragon works is through deception. We're not going to examine it in details, but you study chapter 3, verse 1 following, and see the way he approaches the dragon, approaches Eve. Subtly, cunningly, but he's got a point in mind, which is to separate her and Adam from God unto himself. And he begins to deceive her through the strategic way he approaches. And so this is our enemy. Doesn't come openly. Comes with cunning in order to lead us along and to ultimately deceive us and to break our connection with God. And he takes time to do it. Sometimes it's not that front-on confrontation with the dragon, but it's much more subtle. Just starts with the smallest things, and he leads us step by step by step away until we come to that point where we know there's now a great gulf between ourselves and God. And when did it happen? It just happened so subtly, so cunningly. And so this aspect of the dragon, his craftiness and cunningness and working through deception, is a key point. It comes up in Revelation chapter 12 verse 9. Just a bit further down, the great red dragon was thrown down. And who was he? This is the verse we're looking at. He's the deceiver of the whole world. This is the other part of the chiasm. You following? The outer two? This is it. So that ancient serpent works through deception. He's the one deceiving. Literally, in the Greek it means the one deceiving. It's a present participle. It's got that idea of a continuity of the act of deception. It doesn't stop. It just goes on and on and on and on. Because it's a present participle in the Greek. And so that's him. He's working cunningly, craftily, subtly, shrewdly, through deception, to gather the whole world. It says there, the whole world, you see. Not just us, but he works this way with every single person. And we'll deal with this in more detail when we get into Revelation chapter 13. Where through great signs and wonders, he deceives the world into setting up an image to the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. It's got it there in chapter 13, you see. Deception.
But when it said that deceivable world, it doesn't include us that we believe in God.
No, because we're not in the world. We're in the church. We're in the hand of God. Okay, now the words the devil and Satan, the middle two. The word devil, I want to look at the word devil. It's a Greek word diabolos. You heard of diabolic? That means devilish. We've taken over the Greek word diabolos and we've taken it into English, and now we use that term diabolic. And you look up diabolical in the dictionary and it means devil-like, diabolical. But it comes from two Greek. It's got two Greek words attached together. And it's a compound word, and the first part of it, dia, is a preposition, which means to go through something or against. And so that's the first part of the word. And bolos comes from the verb ballo, to throw. And so we get from English, we get the word ball. The ball. A ball is from the Greek word ballo, you see. It's got Greek roots. And so this means to throw through or to throw against. That's the literal meaning of the word, but it's got connotations. And the connotations are to throw accusations against, to slander. Are we clear on this? To defame. It's to throw things against which are not really true, huh? And so this is what the word devil is. And this is one of the means he uses to attack God's people and to attack God's church. To throw accusations against, to slander, to defame. Hey, how many of you remember the Chamberlain case in Australia years ago? Yeah? Yeah. Lindy Chamberlain. I had neighbours coming to me and saying, Paul, we know you. Are these things they're saying about the Seventh-day Adventist Church correct? And I said, what things are they saying? Oh, that you sacrifice children. And I just laughed and I said, can you see me joining a church to sacrifice children? They said, well, no. But this is what the papers were full of, all of this rubbish that's got nothing to do with reality. Suddenly all these accusations begin to surface and they start to be thrown not only against Lindy Chamberlain, but against the whole of the Church of God. Sorry? Well, it does sell papers, but the point is that that's true. But the point is there's somebody behind this. You following this?
Yep.
That's what we've got to keep in mind. And I give you some practical advice, and that is be careful how you react to others. Because sometimes people will do something and it annoys and irritates you. And you start to take it personally. And you begin to think negatively about the person who has said or done that certain thing. But they may have done it in all innocence.
I heard someone said to me once, you're Seventh-day Adventist, you're a cult. You're in a cult.
Yeah, well, you get all those kind of comments. But the thing to do is just to hold back and to say, maybe it's not meant the way I'm taking it. You see? Just hold back and don't react, because we've got the devil working. He's on our shoulders and he's whispering things in our ears constantly and continually in order to stir up trouble where there need be no trouble at all. Yeah. Okay. And so that's the devil. Now, as a noun, we translate it slanderer or defamer. So that's what the devil is. He's a slanderer. He's a defamer. He's a false accuser. Very good. And you find it. It's there in our passage. It's actually there in our passage. I think I've put it on. Verse 10.
It is the devil system. It even works in some place in the real life as well.
Well, of course. Because our life is the real life. Isn't it? Church life's real life. To me, it's real life. Okay. Here it says in verse 10, for the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down. Here it is, the accuser of our brethren, who accuses them day and night before who? Before our God. And so this is something we need to keep in mind. Who's he accusing them before? So where's he standing? He's standing in the throne room of God. No, wait. We'll come to this. But this is where he stands. Do we see him in the Old Testament at all standing before God, accusing? Where?
Job.
In Job. Twice in Job. In chapter 1 and in chapter 2. This is in your notes in full detail. And in Zechariah chapter 3. You've got the angel of the Lord and Joshua standing before the angel of the Lord, and he's clothed in filthy garments. And Satan's standing there ready to accuse him. And so we're getting a court scene. You following? A court scene. And now, what is the role of the dragon in that court scene? Thank you. He's the prosecutor. And who's he prosecuting? Us. He's us as individuals as well as us, the church. This is what Revelation's saying about the role of the dragon. Accusing us. Literally, he's the one accusing. And again, it's a present active participle.
What did we do to this devil?
We don't have to do. We don't have to do anything. We don't have to do anything to the devil. The mere fact that you have committed yourself to God makes you his enemy. And so that's why he stands before God and he says, look, see what he's done? Or she's done? Accusations start. Now so-and-so did the same thing. You condemned them. What about her or him? Yeah, we won't go into Judgment Day yet. But he's saying it now. He was saying that. He said that about to God. He's accusing Job of the wrong motivations in a relationship with him. He's accusing Zechariah because he's in filthy garments. And the Lord just says to the devil, Satan, he says to Satan, shut your mouth. This is in Zechariah. Is this not a brand I've plucked from the burning? And then God turns to the angel and he says, take away his filthy garments and put clean garments on him, you see. And so the Lord doesn't let the devil get away with the wrong accusations, because the saints are washing their robes in the blood of the Lamb. Even when we do the wrong things, God's not quick to judge and to condemn. The devil's quick to judge and to condemn. But when we come through the blood of the Lamb, what do we find? Forgiveness and cleansing. You see? But the dragon, this was his role. He's the prosecuting judge, and he's doing it continually, present participle again, because he does it day and night. That's an expression which means continually. So that's his role. And secondly, he's Satan. So the devil's got the idea of the slanderer, the accuser, the prosecutor. We okay on this? Yeah. But when we come to Satan, now Satan is a Hebrew word. It's Hebrew, comes from the Hebrew, but its Greek translation is diabolos, or devil. So he's giving us the name in Greek and in Hebrew. We clear on this? Okay, that's what we're coming to. Because when we come into the Greek language, in the New Testament it's used as a name or title for the devil, Satan. The emphasis in Greek is on the adversary, he who opposes. We following this? Or obstructs. And so this is him. He's the obstructor, he's the opposer, he's the adversary. That's the emphasis in the word Satan. So this is constantly what he's doing, opposing, obstructing us in our Christian lives, and opposing and obstructing the church in its mission. We've got to be so careful. When we live our Christian lives, we've just got to be so careful, because we've got an adversary who's much smarter than we are. Not smarter than God, but much smarter than we are, and playing games all the time with us, obstructing us in our Christian lives, because he doesn't want our lives to work as Christians, and obstructing the church in its mission. Yeah, I'm not sure. We'd have to look that one up. Okay. Now, notice in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil. Do you notice it puts the two together? Yeah, diabolos, the devil. Your adversary, he prowls like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. That's him. Puts those two terms together. So there he is, the adversary. The Greek word for adversary that Peter uses is antidikos, which specifically refers to an opponent in a lawsuit. So this is where he's doing the opposing. He's standing before God as the accuser and the opponent, our opponent in a lawsuit. It was used in court scenes in which accusations were made. This is in your notes. This is in your notes. So he functions as a prosecutor in a courtroom, and he does so before our God. And so there it is, that verse that we looked at a few minutes ago. Okay. And we've looked at that already. So the dragon's defined by who he is. He's the ancient serpent, cunning, clever, crafty, deceptive. He's the slanderer, the adversary, who constantly and continuously is deceiving and accusing us. All right, folks, it's almost half past. I think we'll finish there. What I'll look at the beginning of next week, I'll finish off. We'll look at when was Satan thrown down. That's the first thing. And then we're going to look at the verses about overcoming. You'll find there's notes there you may want to go through during the week, which will make it faster for us when we meet together. But I think rather than pushing on for another 15 minutes, we'll finish at this point of time. All right, I hope this afternoon's been enlightening. Very important passage, laying foundations, which are going to be developed later on in Revelation chapter 13 following. Let's just bow our heads for prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you again for the opportunity that we've had to meet together in the quietness and the peace of this place and at this time. And we thank you for the insights that your Spirit is giving to us, each one, into the book of Revelation. We're praying, Lord, that each one of us might learn to place ourselves firmly and clearly on your side, that you might become to each one of us a wall of fire about us and the glory within us, as you've promised in the book of Zechariah. And so, Father, we commit ourselves to you as we've committed ourselves to the study of your word. We thank you for the opportunities that you've given us, and we ask you to continue to bless us as we grow in our understanding and in our relationship with you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.